You have 25 minutes starting from now. Honorable, you have 25 minutes starting from now.
Thank you once again, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to second the motion that this Honourable House approves the budget statement and economic policy of the government for the year ending 31st December 2021. Mr. Speaker, as I was intimating earlier, I'd like to start by congratulating the Majority Leader and, for the time being, the Minister of State in charge or responsible for finance for delivering the President's budget with such command on that. Our only prayer is that now that he's in charge, Parliament is duly taken care of, as you've been speaking about, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the 2021 budget was themed Warrior Won Here, a Ga expression meaning we are moving forward. So, Mr. Speaker, as we start our debate this afternoon, it will be important to note where we are coming from collectively, where we are going collectively, and that which we ought to do to get us there collectively. And Mr. Speaker, I say collectively because very often when it comes to budget debates, the majority side sees everything right with the economy and the budget, and you'll find the minority side seeing everything wrong with the economy and the budget. But Mr. Speaker, if I may quote from His Excellency the President's State of the Nation address as delivered on Tuesday, the 9th of March 2020, page 2, paragraph 3. He says, "This is what the Ghanaian people demand from us." And he was referring to collaboration between the majority and the minority. He says, "This is what the Ghanaian people demand from us by insisting on virtual parity in the House between the two major parties of our country, the realization of the Ghana project and not the attainment of narrow partisan interests. This must be the guiding principle of the business in the House." The Speaker, if I refer you to paragraph 1144 of the budget statement itself, there's a statement made by the Minister responsible for finance that says, "While we debate and we may disagree on issues, we should always be united on the broad goal of advancing the welfare and progress of our people. Principle and politics in principle. There is more to us than we have so far realized." And then he goes on with a quotation asking us to work together. So, Mr. Speaker, as we start this debate, my prayer is that the common Ghanaian interest is what will guide the submissions that we make. Mr. Speaker, we are debating the principles of the budget, not even the estimates per se. We are debating the consonance between the policy objectives as outlined in the budget statement and economic policy and national imperatives like the Constitution, like the Coordinated Program of Economic and Social Development Policies, etc. Mr. Speaker, in so doing, I will be speaking to just 5 issues. First, a recap of how Ghana has made progress so far. Second, a recap of what has challenged our progress. Third, the need to recover, to transform, and to fulfill the aspirations of our people. I'll speak fourthly about the Ghana Cares of Batampa program, and then finally the future of what we can achieve working together collectively. Mr. Speaker, if you look at Chapter 6, 1992, Article 36, Clause 1, with your permission, if I quote, "The state shall take all necessary action to ensure that the national economy is managed in such a manner as to maximize the rate of economic development and to secure the maximum welfare, freedom, and happiness of every person in Ghana, and to provide adequate means of suitable employment and public assistance to the needy." Mr. Speaker, a cursory look at some of the benchmarks of our economic progress over the years shows that we have been responding to this imperative. If you take growth, one of the major measures of how our economy is picking up, we have moved from about 3.4 in 2016 to about 7.9 as at the end of 2019. In fact, non-oil GDP growth moved from 4.6 in 2016 to 5.8 at the end of 2019. Take inflation, Mr. Speaker. We have successfully, as a country, brought down inflation from about 15.4% in 2016 down to NDS 7.9 in 2019. The monetary policy rate by the Bank of Ghana dropped 25.5% in 2016, down to 16.0 at the end of 2019. Budget deficits brought down to about 4.8 in 2019. Primary balance from negative 1.1 moved to positive 0.8 between 2016 and 2019. Mr. Speaker, on the face of the data sets, the evidence is clear that we have been making progress as a country. Mr. Speaker, this progress is due to three major factors. One, the economic leadership provided by the executive branch of government. Two, the strong checks and balances that this House exacts on the executive. And three, the hard work of the Ghanaian people. These are the things that have come together to uplift our economy, albeit the few slippages that we have. Mr. Speaker, I know sometimes politicians as we are would like to deny this and question a few, but the progress of Ghana is one that is well known and accepted, whether by the International Monetary Fund, international ratings agencies, or by economists all over.
The first Deputy Speaker to take the chair. Sorry. Please continue.
What we ought to do, Mr. Speaker, is while admitting that generally we have made progress, focus on where our slippages have been and see how to fix it. And that is what brings me to the second item that I want to speak about, Mr. Speaker, our challenges. Article 34(2), and again, because we are dealing with the principles, we are connecting the budget to the imperatives like the Constitution and framework. Article 34(2), Mr. Speaker, says that the President shall report to Parliament at least once a year on steps taken to ensure the realization of the policy objectives contained in this chapter, and in particular, the realization of basic human rights, a healthy economy, Mr. Speaker, a healthy economy, the right to work, right to good health care, and right to education. Mr. Speaker, despite the fact that we have made progress, despite the fact that we have moved forward as a country, we still have some challenges. One of our key challenges being the annual gap between revenues and expenditures, which then translates into year-on-year deficits. Mr. Speaker, this House is well accustomed with the history of how we have brought down deficits and even passed a Fiscal Responsibility Act aimed at ensuring that Ghana, never again should we be on an ordinarily recurring basis, go beyond 5% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, another challenge that we have had over the years is our high debt, which over the years we have tried to bring down. But in 2020, as we are all aware, Mr. Speaker, we were hit by COVID. And COVID, among other things, has exacted a huge burden on our economy. Mr. Speaker, paragraph 72 of the budget speech, I refer to the speech as read by the Minister, says, among other things, that the fiscal impact of COVID-19 was 19.7 billion Ghana cedis. If you add that to the cost of the financial sector cleanup of 21 billion Ghana cedis, the cost of the excess capacity charges paid to IPPs of 12 billion Ghana cedis, we're expending some 52.7 billion Ghana cedis, especially at a time when our revenues have gone low. Mr. Speaker, in many parts of the world, as governments have done their best to provide citizens in hard times, the time is becoming clear to them that they need to introduce measures to raise revenues to close some of these gaps. In the US, for example, having passed a $1.9 trillion support package, President Biden is examining, and it is expected soon will pass, some of the first major tax hikes since 1993 to help the economy close the gap between what they have spent as a result of these challenges and what they ordinarily raise. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that when a nation is at war, citizens have to chip in so that we mobilize resources to win that war. And Mr. Speaker, that brings me to the third matter I would like to speak about, which is recovery, transformation, and the fulfillment of our aspirations. Mr. Speaker, we are at a point in our history where we have no other choice than to engineer a recovery of this economy. The economy that was growing at an average about 6.9 or 7% in the last 3-4 years now came down to about 0.9%, at least in terms of target, in the year 2020. We have no choice than to begin to engineer a recovery of this economy. The government has started its part by introducing a number of measures. First, vaccinating the population, targeting about 20 million people by the end of this year. Why? So that full economic activity can resume and the kind of investment and stimulus into the various sectors can bring back that strong growth that we experienced. Government has also laid out a clear plan to invest in and stimulate some specific, and this is what is captured in what we call the Ghana Cares or Batampa program. Mr. Speaker, I just want to highlight a few of the things that funds are to be invested in this Ghana Cares or Batampa program. Number one, food security. Agri is a major stay of our economy, and we need to continuously support our farmers because, as the numbers have demonstrated in the last 4 years, supported our farmers. Agri productivity increased, and consequent to that, jobs in that sector as well. Mr. Speaker, under this program, we're expecting to extend support to about 1.5 million farmers, and this includes fertilizers, seeds, extension officers from the about 1.2 that we believe has been done so far. We also expect to extend support to rice millers and poultry farmers, and also support commercial farming in Ghana. Mr. Speaker, we expect also under this program to provide support for businesses across this country. Already, the MBSSI has provided about 500 million Ghana cedis in terms of support to various parts of the Ghanaian economy. This needs to be stepped up as we stimulate and invest in more businesses and more sectors of our economy. Mr. Speaker, it is clear that if we do not invest in our healthcare system, one pandemic can literally collapse our entire economy. And so there is the need to invest significantly in the healthcare system. Agenda 1, the President has been speaking about, is on the cards. Additionally, we want to fast-track digitization and develop engineering, machine tool, and ICT industries. So, Mr. Speaker, the post-COVID economic recovery program is one that, first of all, requires us to come back from that fiscal deficit of about 11% to 9% this year, 7% in the third year, and back to the fiscal responsible limit of about 5% by the year 2024. Among other things, this post-COVID economic recovery program also focuses on ensuring that we bring back rebounding growth in various sectors of the economy, as I have just outlined. It also seeks to ensure that debt sustainability is, because as we invest in the productive sectors and get the GDP up, we expect that our debt to GDP ratio will come back to the levels where we were before COVID hit us. Right, Honorable Speaker, to do all of these things without worsening our deficit position or our debt position currently, that the administration introduces some revenue measures to support it to do so. I want to quickly refer to Article 36, 2C of the Constitution, and with your permission, I'll read as we connect the policy underpinnings to our imperatives. Mr. Speaker, the Constitution says, the state shall, in particular, take all necessary steps to establish a sound and healthy economy whose underlying principles shall include ensuring that individuals and the private sector bear their fair share of social and national responsibilities, including responsibilities to contribute to the overall development of the country. Mr. Speaker, we are at that point where every Ghanaian has to chip in a little so that we're able to recover and fulfill our objectives. In doing so, the administration has introduced two key elements. One, tax compliance elements. Mr. Speaker, His Excellency the President told this House that as part of the digitization program, national identification numbers will now double as tax identification numbers. In an instant, the pool of persons who are available to contribute their quota in fulfillment of this constitutional obligation now moves from about 3 million people to about 15 million people. What that means is that the Ghana Revenue Authority is in a position to engage a larger pool and exact what needs to be exacted to fill the treasury so that we can deliver on these things that we speak about. Mr. Speaker, in addition to these, government has also introduced the COVID-19 levy. Government has also signaled to adjust road tolls. Government has introduced the sanitation and pollution levy, and a 5% profit before tax for the financial sector recovery program. Mr. Speaker, it is our expectation that these are revenue measures that this House will support, because they contribute significantly to ensuring that what appears to be a high revenue target this year can be met, and that revenue coming together with the other resources of the state can now help us, as we mentioned earlier, to recover from the challenges of the pandemic and to invest in the things that will bring about the growth and the jobs and the income that our people look for. Right, Honorable Speaker, this administration, also being a sensitive administration, has not only introduced revenue measures, but has also introduced a number of reliefs aimed at easing the burden on various sectors of the economy. These include, for example, the provision of a rebate of 30% on income tax due for companies in the hotel, restaurant, education, arts and entertainment, travel and tour industries for the second, third and fourth quarters of 2021. And Mr. Speaker, here I make particular mention of the fact that my colleagues in the media who operate in the arts and entertainment industry can look forward to benefiting from these rebates in the year 2021. It is because government is clear in its mind that as the economy contracts and business revenues contract, they that benefit the most from advertising also suffer the lot. And that is why government has introduced these measures. Mr. Speaker, government is also suspending quarterly income tax in payment for the second, third and fourth quarters of 2021 for small businesses using the income tax stamp system. Government is also suspending the quarterly installment payments of vehicle income tax for the second, third and fourth quarters of 2021 for trotros and taxis. And finally, government is extending the waiver of interest as incentive for early payment of accumulated tax arrears. Right, Honorable Speaker? So the government is not only introducing measures aimed at raising revenue, it is also introducing measures aimed at easing the burden on various segments of the economy. When we support the government in succeeding in these measures, we expect to be back on track so that some of the key initiatives of this administration, which prior to COVID were getting us on track to that promised land, can be funded full throttle and can yield the benefits we are looking for. These include the free senior high school program, which fulfills Articles 25 and 38 of the Constitution, planting for food and jobs, the nation building corps, and then the 1D, 1F program. Because, Mr. Speaker, industrialization is one of the imperatives that we must focus on in accord with the directive principles of state policy. Mr. Speaker, the Akufo-Addo administration in its first term published the Coordinated Program of Economic and Social Development Policies 2017 to 2024. That program, among other things, holds about 5 major pillars. First being economic development, second being social development, third being environment, infrastructure, and human settlements development, the fourth being a focus on governance, corruption, and public accountability, and the fifth being the strengthening of Ghana's role in international affairs. If you take a look at the 2021 budget statement and economic policy, all of these initiatives or all of these priority areas are attended to in detail, with funding allocations even sometimes higher than what had occurred in the previous year. It is because we believe clearly that though it is manage expenditure in a manner that does not cause us to exceed our thresholds, these are areas that a lot of attention must be paid to. And that is why you will find resources being invested, as I mentioned earlier, in agriculture to support farmers, resources being invested to support industry, and under industry to ensure that some of the major challenges to industry, including the availability of round-the-clock energy at affordable prices to our people, is attended to. You will find that in this budget, attention is paid to the need to protect the environment, and revenue measures introduced to ensure that we raise revenues to protect the environment, to enhance sanitation, and to curb pollution. you would find in this budget that resources are made available to support the roads program and infrastructure, as well as housing. Right, Honorable Speaker, we cannot, as a country, allow the temporary challenges that we face today to hold us back. We need to get our loins, we need to bite the bullet, raise some more resources, and invest same in the things that we all aspire to achieve as a country. Because in the last 4 years, it was demonstrably clear that when the government succeeded in raising resources, putting those resources into agriculture, agriculture experienced a rebound. Putting those resources into industry, industry experienced a rebound. Putting those same resources into public services, among other things, experienced a rebound. I want to call on all members of this House that as a government program has been put before us, and as a government request of us to support its revenue measures, we all rally behind the government, pass these revenue measures and approve this budget, raise the resources that are required, and most importantly, Mr. Speaker, ensure that the resources are put to the uses for which they have been advertised. Because, Mr. Speaker, for all of us members of Parliament who demand road projects in our constituencies, if government desires to increase the road tolls marginally, to raise more resources and ensure that our contractors are paid on time so that our roads are done, it is something that will benefit our constituents and will benefit us as well. For all of us who complain that the President's promise that Accra should become one of the cleanest cities in Africa within a period of time, that promise has not materialized. I am sure that if we pay a little extra and those funds are put to the proper use, and we're able to make not just Accra, Kumasi, Takoradi, Tamale, and other cities the cleanest in West Africa, it will serve our constituents well and serve us well. So, I call on colleagues in this House to support the budget statement and economic policy of government, to approve these measures so that we can mobilize these resources and get back on track as to where Ghana was before we were hit by these challenges. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity.
Honorable Kesel Atofosin, ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity also to contribute to the debate. Mr. Speaker, in doing so, let me put on record that an effective fiscal consolidation should always lead to a reduced public debt to a sustainable limit. But sadly, Mr. Speaker, it is only in the case of Ghana that the government claims that they are consolidating the fiscal for 4 years in a row, yet our public debt is increasing at an increasing rate at an unsustainable limit. So, Speaker, this is scary. The Speaker, again, in the budget statement, references have been made that the government has been undertaking fiscal consolidation since 2017, 2020, when COVID actually arrived. The Speaker, what I seek to do today is to track the fiscal part and to make a point that Ghana cannot blame COVID entirely as we encounter an economic mess. The Speaker, in fact, the problem indeed started in the year 2018, and no one should make an attempt to blame COVID for the economic mess we are going through. So, Speaker, I said this because, the Speaker, if you are to look at the fiscal as presented to us by our Minister of Finance then, the Speaker, we were told that the deficit for the year 2017 was 4.8%. Simple put, Mr. Speaker, government of Ghana could not raise enough revenue to be able to cater for its expenditure, to the extent that in nominal terms we had to raise an amount of 12.2 billion Ghana cedis as debt to support the budget. This means that, Mr. Speaker, the government inherited a public debt of 120.3 billion. Of that amount, Mr. Speaker, additional 12.2 billion was added to the public debt. Mr. Speaker, if you are to adjust for the exchange rate valuations in our external debt, you will notice that indeed our public debt for the year 2017 moved from 120 billion to 142.5 billion. Mr. Speaker, I wish to use this opportunity to clearly commend the Minister of Finance for the year 2017. Mr. Speaker, this is so because, in fact, you give credit when credit is due. That in the year 2017, the government indeed undertook some fiscal consolidation measures. Mr. Speaker, sadly, Mr. Speaker, we lost the year 2018. We lost our way in the year 2018, and the situation started getting worse. Mr. Speaker, in the year 2018, again, our minister responsible for finance came to us, informed this honorable House that the fiscal deficit was 3.9% of GDP, representing 11.6 billion Ghana cedis. Simply put, Mr. Speaker, we borrowed only 11.6 billion Ghana cedis to increase our public debt at a time of 142.5 billion. Mr. Speaker, I beg to put this on record that is not true. That is not the case, Mr. Speaker. The situation of misreporting actually started back in 2008. Mr. Speaker, now I prove this. Mr. Speaker, I prove this in the sense that, Mr. Speaker, an amount of 9.8 billion Ghana cedis was excluded from the fiscal. Mr. Speaker, this was excluded from the fiscal, Mr. Speaker, and the IMF document here confirmed this. Mr. Speaker, if you have the IMF Article 4 document, April 2020, Mr. Speaker, contractors responsible for finance informed us. The IMF says that in the year 2018, our deficit was 7%, and certainly not 3.9% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, clearly you could see that the part is increasing and not actually reducing, as we've been told by the budget statement. Mr. Speaker, again, if you are to track the year 2019, you will notice that, as we've been told, that the minister informed this House that the fiscal deficit was 4.8% of GDP. If you are to express it in nominal, it means that we spent more than we could raise by an amount of 16.89 billion Ghana cedis. Mr. Speaker, what this means is that we added 16.8 billion Ghana cedis to our public debt. Mr. Speaker, once again, this has proven not to be the case. Mr. Speaker, again, this has been corroborated by the IMF Article 4 document. Mr. Speaker, my worry is that an amount of 5.1 billion Ghana cedis was excluded from the fiscal. Again, an amount of 3.1 Ghana cedis being a financial sector cost, again, was excluded from the fiscal. Mr. Speaker, so you could see the misreporting from day one, from 2018 to 2019. The Speaker means that in the year 2019, government of Ghana increased our public debt in nominal terms by 25.2 billion Ghana cedis. 25.2 billion, and certainly not 16.8 billion Ghana cedis. That was the financing part. The Speaker, as I said, we lost our way back in 2018. The Speaker, this increased our public debt to 217.9 billion Ghana cedis as at the year 2019. The Speaker, this is serious. The Speaker, my worry is that this August House, we have allowed the ministry responsible for finance to always come and present a financial statement, government policy contrary to what everyone else in the world is using. So, Speaker, we are also part of the problem. Parliament of Ghana is part of the problem because, Mr. Speaker, we fail to check them. We fail to point to them that indeed what they are doing is wrong. Mr. Speaker, that is why the budget office is urgently required. Mr. Speaker, we will need a budget office to be able to check the ministry responsible for finance. Mr. Speaker, this is simple. The debt accumulation and the impressions created that our government is consolidating fiscally is. Mr. Speaker, if you are to look at the year 2020, the case is even worse. Mr. Speaker, the year 2020, in the budget statement, yes, in the budget statement, so you can all pick it, your budget statement. Mr. Speaker, the minister responsible for finance appeared before us, informed us that the deficit was 44.9 billion Ghana cedis. That's the financing gap, 44.9 billion Ghana cedis. Meaning that if you are to express it as a percentage of our GDP of 383 billion, then it is 11.7 billion Ghana cedis. The Speaker, sadly, this deficit excludes the financial sector cost of 8 billion. The Speaker, if you are to add the financial sector cost of 8 billion, that will move you to 13.8% of GDP. And Speaker, strangely, and to my surprise, an amount of 6.2 billion Ghana cedis being energy sector payment, again, is missing from the budget statement. 6.2 billion energy sector payment. Mr. Speaker, so the fiscal deficit isn't 11.7, but Mr. Speaker, it is in fact 15.3% of GDP. 15.3% of GDP for the year 2020. Mr. Speaker, again, if you are to look at the budget statement, Appendix 3B, you will notice that the ministry responsible for finance has provisioned 2020. They incurred arrests of 3.2 billion Ghana cedis. Mr. Speaker, Appendix 3B, Mr. Speaker, 3.2 billion Ghana cedis. If you are to add this arrest to it, then you will notice that the fiscal deficit, including financial sector and energy sector payment, plus arrest, will be 17.5 billion Ghana cedis. So, Mr. Speaker, well, it's about 17.5% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, this means that the financing that we needed for the year 2020 was 67.3 billion Ghana cedis, meaning that we added to our public debt an amount of 67.3 billion Ghana cedis in 1 year. In 1 year. Mr. Speaker, this, for me, is something that we should send a strong signal to the Ministry of Finance. Mr. Speaker, I want to put on record that for us, we members of Parliament of this side of the House, we should send a strong message to the Minister responsible for Finance. And the Minister, until these anomalies are corrected, we will not be part of the passage of this budget statement. Mr. Speaker, these are critical issues. These are critical issues because, Mr. Speaker, this is the way that you will be able to track the debt accumulation. Until you track the way we accumulate debt and we decide to tickle ourselves and create wrong impressions that the government is actually consolidating, Mr. Speaker, will end up destroying the country that we have. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, I call on you, Mr. Speaker, to ask the Minister responsible for Finance to, as a matter of urgency, correct these anomalies in the budget statement. Because, Mr. Speaker, it well of us. It doesn't speak well of us. I have not seen any country where some expenditures are regarded as an extraordinary expenditures, and then also those expenditures are not captured in the fiscal table. Mr. Speaker, I challenge the Ministry responsible for Finance to show me one country that has a fiscal table as messed up as we have, contrary to the international standard. Mr. Speaker, this is not allowed, and this should not be accepted. Mr. Speaker, that is why we find ourselves in a serious debt situation. Mr. Speaker, oftentimes we ask ourselves that, where did we get to where we are? Why is it that public debt has increased so much that we cannot even control it? Mr. Speaker, if you are to look at the debt profile, the debt profile speaks for itself. Mr. Speaker, you notice that President Atamils increased our public debt by 26.2 billion Ghana cedis. President increased our public debt by 84.3 billion Ghana cedis. Mr. Speaker, within 4 years, President Nana Addo Akufo-Addo increased our public debt by 171.2 billion Ghana cedis. 171.2 billion Ghana cedis. Mr. Speaker, this represents 60% of our debt stock today. 60% of our debt stock today within 4 years. Mr. Speaker, I heard the majority leader in Ho on Saturday making a strong argument that, Mr. Speaker, it does not matter how much you owe. What matters is whether you'll be able to pay your debt or not. Mr. Speaker, I'll prove to you that today Ghana is at the tipping edge. We are getting close to a level that we may not be able to pay our debt. Sadly, that is where we are getting to. Mr. Speaker, oftentimes you hear arguments that why is it that advanced countries like Japan, America, UK has huge debt in excess of 100% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, our ability and their ability can never be the same. Mr. Speaker, in the US, in the UK, in most of the advanced countries, they are doing as a percentage to their GDP 35 to 40%. 35 to 40%. You are struggling to do 12% and you want to compare yourself. And that is why we have a debt limit of 70%. And so your revenue is about 3 times what those countries achieve. 3 times. So whilst you can carry 70% of debt to GDP, they can carry 210%. So you cannot compare yourself to those countries. Mr. Speaker, so that argument is moot, and we should stop making that argument. What we should be interested in is to make sure that just like our peers are doing, we stay within our peers. The Speaker, most importantly, anytime you hear the case, then our colleagues from the MPP says that, oh, the rate of debt accumulation has slowed under the MPP. The Speaker, let us not tickle ourselves. Rate of debt accumulation doesn't mean much. What it means, simple, is that you are comparing period 1 to period 2 and express it over the previous year. Simple. So anytime the denominator increases, then certainly the rate of debt will slow down. This is nothing. It has no space in debt sustainability. Mr. Speaker, now to the point that our leader raised. Mr. Speaker, we have, for us to find out whether our debts are unsustainable or sustainable, there are issues we have to interrogate. And the major issue we have to interrogate about, Mr. Speaker, the key one that all of us talks about is the fact that our debt, express our debt as a percentage to our GDP. Mr. Speaker, clearly, you will notice that in the year 2016, our public debt was 55.97, approximately 56% of GDP. Within 4 years, this administration has moved our public debt from 55.97% of GDP to 76% of GDP. This means that, Mr. Speaker, over a period of 4 years, you have increased our debt to GDP by 20%. Mr. Speaker, and you call yourself better managers of the economy. Mr. Speaker, this is sad. Mr. Speaker, apart from that, Mr. Speaker, sit down. The previous administration took the public debt from 42.9% of GDP to 55.6% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, this represents 8% increase. 8% increase. So we have increased our debt by 8%.
Honorable Ranking Member, kindly hold on. Yes, Honorable Deputy Leader.
Speaker, Honorable Atuforsen was once a deputy finance minister, and his submission on the debt stock and the percentages are very misleading. All the submissions are misleading, and it is a house of record. You inherited a debt of 9.5 billion. When you left office, it was 122 billion, which was over 1,200%. Why don't you today create the impression to the world that a debt increase of 160% is worse off? You had 8 years of over 1,200%. You were there as a deputy finance minister.
Honorable Leader.
Mr. Speaker, that is very
Honorable
misleading.
Leader, you said it was misleading. So I was listening to see what is it that is misleading. But
Mr. Speaker, what he said, Mr. Speaker, the context he placed his argument was to the effect that there has been a worse management of the economy by way of increasing the debt stock. He says within 4 years, we've increased it by 160%. I am saying that that is wrong. That you had 8 years and you increased by about 1,500%.
Thank you. You'll get your opportunity to argue that. Thank you. Honorable Ranking Member, please continue.
Mr. Speaker, I hope you will take note of the interruptions and adjust the time appropriately. Mr. Speaker, in the year 2012, Ghana's public debt was 47.8% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, in the year 2013, President Mahama reduced the public debt to 42.5% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, this public debt subsequently increased to 51.19%. And then, Mr. Speaker, by the end of 2016, this public debt increased to 55.97% of GDP, approximately 56% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, in the year 2017, President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo reduced the public debt from 56% to 55.56% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, but in the year 2018, this public debt started going up to 57.58% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, before COVID, the public debt increased to 62.47% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, and the situation got worse to 76% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, as if that is not enough, Mr. Speaker, one major way of us to assess as to whether we are in a position to repay our debt or not is to compare our debt to our revenue. Mr. Speaker, and that is the debt sustainability issues we should be concerned about. Mr. Speaker, I'll give you some statistics. Mr. Speaker, in the year 2018, if you are to compare our tax revenue to the debt service, Mr. Speaker, and debt service simply means interest payment and amortization. Amortization, Mr. Speaker, is the debt that you are paying, the principal amount you are paying. Mr. Speaker, if you are to compare debt service to tax revenue, in the year 2013, we used to spend 39.28% of our tax revenue to service our debt. This amount, Mr. Speaker, increased to 47.11% in 2014, increased to 55.04% in 2015. Mr. Speaker, by the time we were leaving office, the ratio changed to 66.43% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, sadly, this government then came to office and increased it to 88.9% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, this means that your tax revenue, all the taxes that we collect in this economy, Mr. Speaker, we have to spend approximately 90% of that amount for the purposes of debt service. Mr. Speaker, this is serious. This is serious, Mr. Speaker. That is why I'm trying to point to the fact that we should be careful because we are the tipping edge. Mr. Speaker, again, if you are to take only the interest, Mr. Speaker, interest is different from debt service in the sense that you are not paying principal. So we should be concerned about interest only. Mr. Speaker, as of 2013, in fact, we were spending 33.1% of our tax revenue for the purposes of paying interest. Mr. Speaker, increased to 47.48% in the year 2016. Mr. Speaker, today we have to spend 55.34% of our tax revenue for the purposes of paying interest in the year 2020. Mr. Speaker, before COVID, this amount was 46.22 in the year 2019. Mr. Speaker, so how can anybody just turn around and come and blame COVID? The problem is not COVID. The problem indeed is mismanagement. That's what the problem is. It's your mismanagement that has created the mess, and you cannot blame COVID. So, Speaker, again, on the sustainability issues. So, Speaker, if Ghana is to take all our export, and express it as a percentage to our external debt, the component of the debt that certainly, Mr. Speaker, will be paying to our foreign investors. Mr. Speaker, clearly, if you are to take the timber we export, the cocoa we export, things like gold, petroleum, everything, oil that we export, Mr. Speaker, including pineapples that we export. The problem we have here under President Nana Akufo-Addo is that amount is not enough to even pay for our external component of the debt. Mr. Speaker, in fact, you need 70% more of your export to service that debt. And you are telling me that it doesn't matter. You can just go ahead and then borrow. Mr. Speaker, we are getting to a level that if care is not taken, we cannot pay to our debt. Mr. Speaker, as if that is not enough, Mr. Speaker, let us now compare the interest that we pay and then show it as a ratio on the capital expenditure. Mr. Speaker, one reason why this thing is extremely important is that, Mr. Speaker, oftentimes we complain about economic growth. Mr. Speaker, there's the need for us to smoothen our economic growth over the period. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, are deployed in such a way that it will benefit the key sectors of the economy. Today, Mr. Speaker, we are confronted in a situation where we raised so much revenue but ended up using the entire revenue for the purposes of paying interest because we have borrowed too much, because we failed to smoothen, and because, Mr. Speaker, the mismanagement has been continuing since 2018. Mr. Speaker, clearly, today, in the year 2017, you needed 2.5 times of your interest payment to be able to only pay for your capital expenditure. Mr. Speaker, in the year 2018, this amount increased. Capital expenditure is 3 times of our interest payment. Mr. Speaker, again in the year 2019, the situation got worse, almost 4%. Almost 4 times before we could pay our interest. Mr. Speaker, so you could see the mismatch in the economy. Mr. Speaker, no wonder we are where we are today. Mr. Speaker, on the issue of debt sustainability, let's no one creates impression that Ghana as a country, we are in the position of our debt. So we are in a position to service our debt. So we should continue borrowing. Mr. Speaker, accidents can happen. Accidents can happen. And I say this, Mr. Speaker, because it's confronted with a situation where you spend approximately 90% of your tax revenue for the purposes of servicing your debt. You should be worried about. We should be worried about. Mr. Speaker, we are getting to a level that, Mr. Speaker, if you are not careful, our debt has gotten to a level that it can end up slowing growth, economic growth, to a sustainable limit, Mr. Speaker, and that is why we should be worried about. Mr. Speaker, and that is why, Mr. Speaker, today we are confronted with a situation of government saddling us with public debt. Public debt to the extent that now we have to pay. So the option is that Ghanaians must pay in the form of taxes. Mr. Speaker, today they have introduced taxes that all of us are worried about. The ordinary Ghanaian is complaining. The ordinary Ghanaian is complaining. Complaining because the taxes are so harsh. You have now decided to introduce a COVID tax. A COVID tax. Mr. Speaker, you have decided to increase national health insurance levy from 2.5% to 3.5%. You have said that the informal sector that used to pay 3% VAT flat rate, you are increasing it to 4%. Mr. Speaker, this is not fair. This is not fair. The informal sector should not be the one to carry the government mismanagement. They shouldn't be the one. Mr. Speaker, the informal sector rather needs support. The informal sector needs support. They don't need additional taxes. This government is insensitive, Mr. Speaker. This budget, Mr. Speaker, is nothing but a bitter budget. This is a bitter budget. This is a budget that doesn't seem to care. A budget that is only imposing taxes. You have taxes from heaven to hell. Mr. Speaker, since I became Ghanaian, since I was born as a Ghanaian, Mr. Speaker, I've never seen a budget with so much taxes like this. Mr. Speaker, I've never seen one. Wow. Mr. Speaker, this tax is so much. The taxes are so much, Mr. Speaker. Since Nkrumah went to Guinea, we have never seen taxes like this. Mr. Speaker, this is dangerous. Mr. Speaker, this budget, Mr. Speaker, if I may give it a name, Mr. Speaker, it's like go home and die. Mr. Speaker, this is Kojo budget. Wow. Kojo budget. Go home and die budget. Mr. Speaker, the government doesn't seem to care. And that is why I'm saying that, Mr. Speaker, some of these taxes we should be careful. And the worst one, Mr. Speaker, has to do with an increase of 5% additional tax on the financial sector. Mr. Speaker, the financial sector is about to recover. It's about to recover. Remember, you have already imposed the National Fiscal Stabilization Levy of 5% on the financial sector. And then you've added 5% additional COVID tax on them. This will mean that the financial sector is going to pay 35% corporate income tax. 35% of corporate income tax. Mr. Speaker, what this simply means is that investors, certainly they are not for the Christmas. They will pass on this tax to us, and you are the one going to pay through bank charges. Mr. Speaker, and that is why I've said that this government is insensitive. Mr. Speaker, these taxes are going to go up, and the taxes, when they go up, Mr. Speaker, will not be good for us. My worry is that some of these taxes are distortionary. Some of these taxes will introduce dead weight costs to the extent that it will distort investors' decision. And going forward, if you are not careful, Mr. Speaker, it will affect the nation. Mr. Speaker, that is why I wish to urge this august House to ensure that we understand where we are coming from and why we are where we are. Mr. Speaker, we are where we are because of some of these concerns that I've raised. The misreporting is a key matter. International community and the investor community are worried that Ghana is constantly misreporting. Mr. Speaker, as an august House, we should pull the brakes. We should urge the minister responsible for finance that going forward, they should stop misreporting. That is why I can assure you. That is why I can assure you that I will not be part of the approval of this budget until those misreporting issues are concerned. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, but this budget is Kojo budget.
Honorable Abena Osei Asari.
you for the opportunity. But before I go, I just want to clear some misreporting that my colleague on the other side has just stated. One, Mr. Speaker, the data we present to the people of Ghana and the international world is valid, it's credible. This is because we always show the deficit with the financial sector bailout and the energy sector bailout, and then we show the deficit without it. And included in our debt is that of the financial sector bailout and the energy sector bailout. Mr. Speaker, this is unprecedented. When last year, in the midst of the COVID pandemic, we had to go to IMF for $1 billion Ghana cedis, $1 billion US. If the data we presented was wrong, in 3 weeks, just 3 weeks, IMF wouldn't have given us $1 billion without any conditions. Mr. Speaker, when they had to go for a bailout in 2015, when they had to go out for a bailout in 2015 of less than $1 billion conditions to fulfill, which they even failed to fulfill. So, Mr. Speaker, we create data to the people of Ghana and the IMF as well. They wouldn't have gone ahead to give us $1 billion when we needed it in just 3 weeks. Mr. Speaker, again, my brother on the other side said that our debt to GDP ratio is rising. Mr. Speaker, when you check the analysis from 2017 to 2019, we were doing a debt to GDP ratio of below 65%, including the financial sector bailout and the energy sector bailout. We were doing 62.5%, way below the 65% we had set for ourselves, and the ECOWAS of 70%. And then COVID hit. So we moved from 62.5 straight to 76. And it's as a result of the extra expenditures that we had to incur and the revision in our revenues as a result of the lockdown and the other adverse effects of COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, my colleague on the other side also said that we are using more than 70% of our tax revenue to service interest. Point of correction, it is not 70%. It is 50% if it's the total revenue. And if it's the tax revenue, the domestic tax revenue, it is 62%. Just to correct you on that. Mr. Speaker, we were here in 2013 when they used 72% of revenue to pay for just compensation. 72% of our revenue was used to pay for compensation in 2013, and it's right in the budget for 2013. Mr. Speaker, let me continue with the debate. Mr. Speaker, once again, I thank you for the opportunity to support the motion on the floor. And in doing so, I'd like to thank the government for the great job it has done in support during this trying period of a global pandemic of unprecedented proportion, which has transformed into an economic crisis for not just Ghana alone, but the whole world. Mr. Speaker, the IMF projected that the effects of COVID-19 pandemic will see global debt rise by 98%. Deficits will go up. There will be contraction in growth by 3.8%. And even in the sub-Saharan Africa, a negative growth was predicted. Yet within these challenges, Mr. Speaker, Ghana has within the past years scored a positive growth in virtually all the sectors except the industry. Mr. Speaker, we have come away with a projected positive end-of-year outlook, 0.9% growth of GDP. Mr. Speaker, the agri sector grew by 4.5%, thanks to the government planting for food and jobs and the provision of farm machinery at subsidized cost to our farmers. Mr. Speaker, we can compare this to the growth of 2.9% in 2016, when there was no COVID or any serious pandemic like we have today. Mr. Speaker, yes, it's in the industry that we saw some contraction of 3.1%. And Mr. Speaker, prior to 2020, this sector in 2019 witnessed a growth of 6.4%. When we took over in 2017, this sector in 2016 had a growth of 4.3%. and then we took it to 15.7% in 2017. So if we say that we can do it again, yes, we can. Mr. Speaker, in the services sector, we have seen many hotels being shut down for about 9 months, but yet still we have seen some positive growth of 1.9%. And this was as a result of the government investing in ICT digitization and also the banking sector showing recovery after the investment of 21 billion Ghana cedis. This could have been curtailed if my people on the other side had taken the bull by the horn way back. This 21 billion could have been curtailed, Mr. Speaker. And so when they talk about debt accumulation, they should also think about the things they failed to do that has resulted in what we see now. Mr. Speaker, this positive growth outlook in GDP in the wake of this pandemic has also come about as a result of government also exhibiting tenacity to stick to all its priority programs, like the free SHS, the NAPCO, 1D, 1F, 1 million per constituency, planting for food and jobs, nurses and teachers training allowances. All these programs were fully funded from 2017 to 2020, and I can assure the House that it is still fully funded to the tune of 6.97 billion in the 2021 budget. And this can be found on page 241 of the budget. Mr. Speaker, for me, I can confidently say that had it been my friends on the other side in government, there is no way we could have seen the continuity of these social policy interventions. But we thank God for Nana Akufo-Addo's second term, and so there will be continuity with these social policy interventions that affect the common man and the citizens at large. Mr. Speaker, in the wake of the pandemic, many people in the public sector around the world lost their jobs. Some saw huge pay cuts, others saw retrenchment. But for us in Ghana, all the 650,000 public workers had job security. They never missed their salaries. All the agreements that were signed with them concerning pay increase for 2020, we were able to fulfill all these things. The government lived up to it when it said that it will save lives and protect lives. Mr. Speaker, all these things that we did came at a huge cost, which affected our deficits and debt levels because revenues were revised during the mid-year by 13.4 billion. And so government had to borrow to take care of the existing expenditure and the additional COVID-19 expenditures to the tune of 11.3 billion. So looking to the future, the government wants to return us to the path of debt sustainability and economic growth and has committed to a GDP growth rate of 5%, inflation of 8%, overall deficit of 9.5%, and a primary balance of 1.9% of GDP. With the COVID alleviation and revitalization of enterprises support, the Ghana Cares, the government's transformation agenda for growth in the short to the medium term is set to progress. Mr. Speaker, we do not have a perfect economy, and we all seek the aspiration of a better developed economy. We expect our friends on the other side to point these things out to us, sometimes passionately, sometimes vociferously, like Honorable Atoforsen just did. But one thing that we want to maintain, however, is the unity of purpose. Mr. Speaker, the global pandemic has thrown us into a war situation, and we cannot afford both MPP and NDC, majority and minority, to be at cross purposes. Mr. Speaker, we are not out of the woods yet, and it's important to put our shoulders to the wheel and share the burden of embracing our revenue situation through a tax policy measure. And that is why we are, one, to support the COVID-19 health levy of 1% increase in the NHIL and the VAT flat rates to support COVID-19 related expenditure. That is why we are urging the House to support an increase in petroleum levels to provide sustainable funding for pollution, sanitation, and waste management, as well as the energy sector program. And that is why we are urging the House to support a financial sector cleanup levy of 5% before profits. Mr. Speaker, note that while the government is seeking to raise revenue through indirect means, Government is also seeking to cushion the burdens of the common person by 1, giving us a 30% tax rebate on the income taxes of companies in the accommodation and food services, education, arts and entertainment, travel and tours industry. We are also suspending tax stamps for small businesses for the second, third and fourth quarter of 2021. We are also suspending the vehicle income tax for our own taxi and truck drivers for the third and fourth quarter of 2021. Again, we are waiving penalties and interest on any payment of all unpaid tax arrears from now to September 2021. Mr. Speaker, this is a budget that takes us round the bend to a race for development after the huge global setback. This government is determined in its efforts to achieve a transformation in the economy and to benefit from the global situation by enhancing our competitive edge. I would urge my brothers and sisters on the other side to support this government, because together we can make it happen. Together we can move Ghana beyond aid. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity.
Honorable Adongo.
Thank you very much, Right Honorable Speaker. Right Honorable Speaker, before I start, I want to make this very clear, that the $1 billion that was given to Ghana was called the Rapid Credit Facility. Rapid, it can be done in 5 days. So if you did it in 3 weeks, you know why. Other countries access it in 10 days because it's a rapid credit facility with modifications to accommodate the exigencies of the time. And so if you did it in 3 weeks, some people's turnaround time was just 1 week. Mr. Speaker, the House was read, particularly looking at the circumstances under which we find ourselves and looking through the measures that have been undertaken across the globe to revive various economies that are challenged by COVID. You found that Ghana was the only country that introduced austerity in the midst of COVID. And I have never seen a country trying to revive from COVID that wants to introduce austerity measures and hope that you'll be able to get out of COVID. As a matter of fact, the measures were introduced deeper and deeper into COVID, and our recovery will take a longer and more painful period to achieve. My honorable ranking member on finance has spoken extensively about the budget deficit. But Mr. Speaker, the budget deficit and the manipulations over the years have always been my pet subject when the budget comes to this floor. And today I intend to demonstrate that our budget deficit has been massaged by 25 billion Ghana cedis. Mr. Speaker, the minister responsible for finance reported that our foreign financial deficit was only 31 million Ghana cedis. 31 million Ghana cedis and nothing more and nothing less. Mr. Speaker, if you look at the budget statement itself, particularly under Appendix 2A, which you find under paragraph page 205, it makes it quite clear that the loans that were contracted for our projects, which were amounted to about 6 billion Ghana cedis. Mr. Speaker, project loans cannot be used to amortize loans. They must be spent on specific projects, and there is no way you can reduce your your deficit financing by using that to pay. So 6 billion unequivocal amount of money cannot be found there. Mr. Speaker, there is also program loans. And I was very sad to see a report in the budget that says that our program loans was only 388 million. Mr. Speaker, in the minister's own document, and here I refer to Appendix 12B, which is Performance Summary of Funding Sources, and you can find that under page 275. Mr. Speaker, this page is listing all the program loans that we contracted and spent here. And this is the minister himself speaking in page 275. He says that we got an amount of 1.3 billion from the World Bank, IPF, and Africa Development Bank, out of which we spent 512 million Ghana cedis. He says we also got another $65 million, which amounted to 377 million, out of which we spent 343 million. He says that there's also a fast-track COVID-19 facility of about 130 million from the World Bank. That amount, we spent it entirely, and it is about 754 million. He says that IMF gave us the equivalent of 585 billion, 5,855 million, out of which we spent 5,566 million. Again, he says the Africa Development Bank also gave us 409 million, out of which we spent 389 million. Mr. Speaker, the minister said the European Union also gave us 504 million. We spent the entire amount. Mr. Speaker, how can all this put together, somebody will look us in the face and say that he only got 388 million? I can't imagine this. And this is House of Records. I don't know who did that to my big brother. Mr. Speaker, the entire amount, if you put all this together, from program loans that the minister himself is reporting, is 7.5 billion Ghana cedis. That money has disappeared from our deficit. And we are now dealing with 388 million, which creates a koshoko of 31 million foreign financing of our public debt. Mr. Speaker, that cannot be the case. Mr. Speaker, we are also aware that this House approved $3 billion, out of which we said $2 billion of the Eurobond money should be spent on the budget. You indicate in your report that you have spent all that money, and yet you say that 2 billion is worth 7.5 billion Ghana cedis. What exchange rate is that? Mr. Speaker, the exchange rate that they themselves use give us our Eurobond utilization on the budget at 11.590 billion. Mr. Speaker, if you put all that together, our foreign financing of the budget comes to an amount of 25.155 billion Ghana cedis, and not 31 million. Mr. Speaker, if you add that to our domestic financing of the budget of 45 billion, Mr. Speaker, we did a deficit of 70.798 billion Ghana cedis. This excludes the matters that my honorable colleague raised regarding off-balance sheet items. These are real cash that you collected and spent, for which you have actually reported in certain aspects of your budget. But where it mattered most, it is. And Mr. Speaker, the budget deficit effectively comes to 18.6 billion on a cash basis. Without adding below or above the line or middle line, it comes to 18.6 billion. How can you look us in the face and do this to us? These are monies we have spent. What it means is that expenditure totaling about 25 billion have disappeared from our expenditure framework. Completely disappeared from our framework. And these are expenditures relating to COVID-19 program expenditure. Mr. Speaker, the whole world is worried about transparency in the utilization of donor funds that came to fight COVID. Not even accounting for the money you spend, and you are taxing us to take more. Mr. Speaker, these are very dangerous times for these people, for our people of Ghana. And we cannot continue on this path. This financial engineering must stop. And Mr. Speaker, this House must insist that the right things are done in order that we get credibility as the political class of our country. We cannot continue on this path. Mr. Speaker, somebody will tell you that some of the monies was used for amortization. Mr. Speaker, this House approved an amount for amortization. We approved $1 billion for amortization. And Mr. Speaker, the minister himself explains in paragraph 165, page 38, that out of the Eurobond money, about 523 billion was used to buy back the 2023 issuance. And about 476 billion of the remaining amount of money was spent on domestic liability management. Mr. Speaker, that exhausts the $1 billion. But Mr. Speaker, in the budget, when it comes to deficit, they report amortization of 14 billion Ghana cedis in order to sweep up the money they spend from borrowing. Mr. Speaker, how can $1 billion metamorphose into 14 billion Ghana cedis? That cannot happen. And this is the kind of gerrymandering that we are facing, and this is what they use to become better managers of the economy. These are better manipulators of the economy, and that cannot happen. Mr. Speaker, I want to make the point that the minister also reports on our public debt. And here again, I want to say that our public debt was conspicuously understated by the records of this House. And here I will prove it. Mr. Speaker, if you look at Appendix 10B, which you find in page 274, it says that there is a schedule they have provided to this House. And that schedule lists all the financial commitments or the loans that we borrowed in this year. Mr. Speaker, I want to go to that document. Their old document, it's not mine. It says new commitments. Appendix 10B, page 249 and page 250. It says new commitments in 2020. These are additional loans we borrowed in 2020, some of which were drawn down just like the Eurobonds were all drawn down and spent, and should go into our public debt. Mr. Speaker, the matters are referred to regarding the COVID-19 expenditures and the program loans are all conspicuously missing in this appendix, which is talking about our new loans. Even if we want to play Darga with Ghanaians, we can play Darga with $1 billion rapid credit facility from IMF. How can we delete that figure from the list of commitments? $1 billion, Mr. Speaker. All the other items that I raised, European Union spending, the Africa Development Money, World Bank money, are conspicuously missing from our debt profile. So, Mr. Speaker, an amount equivalent to 7.5 billion Ghana cedis has been shaved off our public debt. Mr. Speaker, if you add those numbers, our public debt is now 299 billion, threatening to hit 300 billion. Mr. Speaker, that gives us a debt to GDP of 78%. So don't be roaming around with 76% because it doesn't exist. What you owe and the debt to GDP is 78%. Mr. Speaker,
do you know what you are talking about?
I listened to my venerable leader trying strenuously to explain that if they remove the financial sector bailout cost, they remove the energy sector cost from our public debt, our debt to GDP will now be lower. Mr. Speaker, that GDP itself benefited from the banking sector cleanup. When you spend that money on banking sector cleanup, deposited collected that money as income and spent that money to create income. Those who also collected it also spent it and it created streams of income. We call it the multiplier effect of income. Have you discounted the multiplier effect of your GDP? If you just realize that man of that, if you hadn't spent that, your GDP would have been a Kojo GDP that would give you a debt to GDP close to 100%. So don't even try. It is a very, very rudimentary analysis of economics that you can just eliminate something that created the GDP, but keep the benefit in the GDP and strike a difference and get a balance. It doesn't happen like that. It is important that you report the true state of our affairs. It's in shambles.
You have been forgiven.
Mr. Speaker,
You've been forgiven.
I also listened to the minister responsible for finance say that Ghana's gross international reserve was about 8.4, and because it's about 8.4, Ghana is doing better, and that's why there is stability. Mr. Speaker,
What are you talking about?
across the globe, gross international reserves are meaningless. The reason is that gross international reserves are not for you. There are people whose liabilities are occurring in the next 6 months. You must take them and put them aside because it's not for you. When you take all that away, including our debt portfolios, the interest payments you are going to make, we need to exclude all of that. Then you get your net international reserves. And Mr. Speaker, our net international reserves is deteriorating. We moved from 5.5 billion in 2019 December to 4.5 billion. Mr. Speaker, if you add, there are some vulnerability items that anybody looking at your net international reserves should be worried about. And Mr. Speaker, I want to list some of them. Your outflows, investment that in Ghana that they can liquidate in short period. Your financial derivatives, your portfolio investments that can be reversed within a short period. Mr. Speaker, those numbers alone are close to 6 billion. In other words, if all these people came for our money, we don't have dollars to give them. We have only 4.5 billion to cover a responsibility of over 6 billion, and we are here celebrating this level of vulnerability. Mr. Speaker, the economy is in shambles. But Mr. Speaker, my good colleague says that the banking sector is in good shape, but I want to talk about what I refer to as policy deception. There is serious policy deception. Mr. Speaker, how can you tax us COVID tax? COVID health tax will give you 899 million. But your government of Ghana expenditure on the health sector is only 13 billion. 13 million. So what happens to the rest of the money? You are not taxing us for COVID. You are taxing us to clean up your mess. Mr. Speaker, they talk about Agenda 111. And yet there is a paragraph that talks about, a table that talks about Ghana government's flagship programs. Mr. Speaker, conspicuously missing in your flagship is Agenda 111. In fact, conspicuously missing is the health sector. So if you have not budgeted adequately for it and it is not important to you, why deceive the people of Ghana?
Honourable Member, your time is up. I gave you the sign. I'm sure you
Mr. Speaker, some people have more time than they can write. Others can write more than they can.
Honourable Member,
Thank you very much, Mr.
share what you have with others so that you don't run out of time. Thank you.
Okay. So, Mr. Speaker, another policy deception is growth.
After your time is up, you are introducing another. I thought we were concluding. Your 5 minutes, 15 minutes. Your 15 minutes is
I want to conclude on policy
conclusion. Very well.
deception. In conclusion, they are budgeting only 90 million for sanitation. Meanwhile, they are collecting 311 million from taxes. So the money is not meant for Bola. Mr. Speaker, I come from a place where they keep telling us that they are going to build the Kwalgu Dam. You have only budgeted for 42 billion for the Kwalgu Dam. What type of dam can you build with 42 billion? Out of a project that is worth over
Party, yes.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker.